Welcome back to our webinar series, Where Do We Go From Here? Conversations about community, resistance, and creativity, presented by Broadleaf Books, Fortress Press, and Beaming Books.
Oh, there are two previous episodes, and you can find those on YouTube or Facebook, so you can join in the conversation and catch up with the things that have already been said, and add this as part of what you reflect on.
I'm Stephanie Saldaña, and I'm excited to introduce Kelley Nikondeha. Kelley is a writer, liberation theologian, and community development practitioner. She combines biblical texts in various cultural contexts to discover insights for embodied justice, community engagement, and living faith. She is the author of The First Advent in Palestine, Reversals, Resistance, and the Ongoing Complexity of Hope, a new edition which will be available in paperback in August, and is known for highlighting Palestinian voices and rights. She travels between the Southwest US and Burundi in East Africa.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Cristina Rathbone. Cristina is an award-winning journalist, Episcopal priest, and spiritual director. She is the author of The Asylum Seekers, a chronicle of life, death, and community at the border. In partnership with Episcopal Migration Ministries, she has founded Neighbor to Neighbor, a national network that supports congregations as they accompany newly arrived asylum seekers.
Thanks, Kelley. And rounding out our conversation today, last but not least, is Stephanie Saldaña. Stephanie's also a journalist and religion scholar from San Antonio, Texas, who spent most of the last 20 years living in the Middle East. She studied religion at Harvard Divinity School and is the author of What We Remember Will Be Saved, a story of refugees and the things they carry, which will also have a new edition in paperback in August. Stephanie's work has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and many other places. She and her family split their time between the Holy Land and France.
Well, I am just so excited to be with both of you today. It's such a joy.
I feel the same.
Well, we certainly have a lot to talk about. As you know, right now the daily headlines are just around migration are just harrowing and heartbreaking, really absolutely devastating. And I know that many of our listeners and watchers today are curious as to what they can do. I know I certainly feel very helpless sometimes. So I think we can start just by each of us sharing a little bit of our experiences of working with refugees, with immigrants, and with storytellers that really center the lives of people on the margins.
Maybe I'll jump in first. Such an honor to be with you both, really, and a joy. So I spent about a year down on the US-Mexico border, mostly in the place between El Paso and Juarez. And I found myself working primarily there with a group of Mexican asylum seekers who were seeking the protection of the United States, a doubly imperiled group because they were still in the country they were seeking to flee. So very, very vulnerable. And they gathered together at the foot of a port of entry, trying every 2 hours, 24 hours a day to be allowed to request asylum, just to be allowed to request asylum. Of course, that right back in 2019 and 2020 and today is enshrined in US law and in international law. But that law was at the very least circumvented all the time, leaving people scrunched in this tiny place right at the edge of the country they're seeking to flee and right on the outer edge of this country. Excuse me. There's a time of turmoil, of fear, of real danger. And I thought, when this book came out, The Asylum Seekers, that it would be out of date, only to find that the situation today is way worse, maybe 50 times worse than it was then, and that this book is, if it's out of date, it's only because the stories it tells are dealing with circumstances that are less dire than the circumstances we find ourselves in now. So that is a crushing blow, really, and something that I never imagined, and I think none of us really ever imagined. And I know we'll get more into the state of things in this country today later on. But what about you, Stephanie or Kelley? Tell us a little bit about the kind of engagement that you've undertaken with our migrant and immigrant neighbors.
Well, I had a very similar experience to you. My book, What We Remember Will Be Saved, really came out of my experience of, I lived in Syria before the war. It's where I learned Arabic and where I sort of found my faith. I made so many close friends. And so when the war started, and I read the newspaper or I watched the news, I just didn't see anything that resembled what was happening. I didn't see the people I knew. I didn't see their stories. And as time passed, this continued. And so I decided, what can I do? And I decided to travel around the world and just meet people from places that were, in some senses being wiped out and ask them what they saved. And so the book is about, the stories of people telling what they saved. And it's really about the diversity of Iraq and Syria as well. The first character she's from an Aramaic speaking village, a Christian village in Iraq. The second are Kurdish musicians who saved their music from Al-Hasakeh. I have a story of a Yazidi young man who saves his family from a genocide before escaping to Europe. A wonderful story, it's everyone's favorite, of a couple who saved their pharmacy in a war by building it in a garage. And so it's really about how people hold on to their humanity and the things that can't be taken from them. But what really struck me and what Cristina was speaking about was that I thought it was about a moment. I thought, okay, this is the war in Syria, this is the war in Iraq. It's a moment in history of mass migration, and we will read this as a kind of historical look into a moment. And I didn't realize it was a new reality. And things are much worse now than when I wrote the book. And so I had a very similar experience. Kelley?
Well, I feel like we are singing off of the same song sheet this morning. When I wrote First Advent in Palestine, the original hope was that I would actually be living. I was going to stay down in one of my favorite places in the world, Bethlehem. I was going to stay there for 4 months and write the book from Star Street. That was the original hope of this book. And then COVID hit. And so I had to write it from my perch out here in the United States. But with the partnership, I was talking daily to Chef Fadi, who's one of my friends, wonderful chef and innkeeper down in Bethlehem. And, I had to find other ways to weave in the stories of my friends from afar. But I was hoping to talk about Advent and these stories that we've been given in our Gospels with my Palestinian friends in mind, making sure I didn't erase their presence, not only in the land, but in these stories that we tell. And I didn't think that it was, apologies, we have planes flying overhead here, but I didn't think that I guess I always knew it could get worse, but I didn't know that 10/7 was about to happen, and that the things happening in Palestine and down in Gaza were going to get immediately worse as they have. And of course, now my book is more important than it was when it first came out, because, as I often say, the atrocities continue. And so part of the reason that Broadleaf has agreed to release the book in paperback is to update, in a sad way, to update these stories in light of 10/7. So here all of us are thinking we're of a moment, but it's right. We are part of this wave of atrocities that just continue to break upon us. If I can say anything about a family or a story that is I'm most familiar with, I mean, I did tell you I'm a liberation theologian. I would say the Holy Family is the immigrant family I am most familiar with, having written out of both Matthew and Luke's gospel stories about Advent. And I think there is something about recognizing that the Holy Family were political refugees. They fled Bethlehem um, for fear of violence, right, of being killed and targeted, to Egypt. And even when they were able to return, when Herod had passed, it was still a dangerous terrain they returned to. And I tend to think that maybe they would have gone back to Bethlehem where they had kind of established some family, reconnected. But even that was too dangerous. And so they go up to Nazareth, in a sense, internally displaced, in my understanding. And I think here we have within the Holy Family the experience that is so utterly human, which is that of migration, seeking refuge, being displaced. And it has really reshaped my understanding of incarnation, that these experiences, that the trauma of migration is actually woven into the very body of God. And it is that deep in our human experience, but also that deep in God and who God is and how God shows up. And that has really shaped how I think about my neighbors, whether I'm in Burundi, where our neighbors are Congolese coming across the border for safety, or whether I'm here right now in Arizona, where I have different neighbors who I need to stand with and partner with and advocate for. But understanding how deeply this is part of the incarnation and how God shows up has been really transformational for me.
So I've obviously thought about the Holy Family so much, Kelley. One thing I'd never thought of before is imagine if Egypt hadn't have let them in. I mean, we don't hear about that in the Gospels, right? And then Egypt said, yes, you can come in and be safe here. But that must have happened in some way. When so many people are being denied that protection in a time of total danger today in our country, in the States. And then the second point, that they didn't return to Bethlehem but went to Nazareth. Again, I never thought about that before, but that pattern is reflected. All of the asylum seekers who were sent back to Mexico, who I knew, none of them were able to return to their towns. None of them. Some returned to towns far away in the same state. They all tried to find a place where they had, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a sister, the daughter of the husband of the friend of the cousin, someone who they could stay with and start their new lives again. But that idea of returning to an internally displaced situation as well, I had never made that connection with the Holy Family. And it's so true. That exact pattern is happening every day on the southern side of the border. Wow. Yeah. And especially, last thing, but especially now, because one of the terrible things that is happening now is that this huge tide of migration north to the States has begun to turn. Some of the administration's programs are working, and now people really are heading south again, feeling too unsafe in this country. And they will for sure be going back to their countries, but different places in their countries, because it isn't safe enough for them to return to their homes.
Wow. What other, I know we've had viewers who have asked, what kind of trends are we seeing in immigration, and in what really tangible ways can we be showing up? I offer that to you to respond.
Sure. I think really what was stunning to me in writing the book, that the sort of heart of the book was a story when I went to the Moria camp in Lesbos. on the Greek island of Lesbos, and it was the winter time. And I was stunned to discover thousands of people in overcrowded conditions, basically left to freeze to death. They were sleeping under trees. It was so cold. The conditions were horrible. I was so astonished. And I've been to camps all over the Middle East that were not this bad. And so it was clear that it was intentionally bad, that it was bad as a way so that people would literally call their family members and say, stay in the war and die, because that is better than coming here. The amount of inhumanity that we're seeing towards people who are expressing their human right to flee to safety. They're not doing this is, first of all, it's not illegal. We all have the right to seek safety. And so they are doing something that is their right. And the way they're being dehumanized, the way they're being left to die, the way we saw the Pylos shipwreck where they left people for hours before hundreds sank in the sea. I mean, the way Europe, they're outsourcing, things to the Libyan Coast Guard. Now we have, Trump saying he's going to send people to Libya, Rwanda. We already saw the UK saying they were going to do. So what we're seeing in America is just a rehash of things that have been already happening in Europe. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying that we've created a narrative that people are doing something wrong, because this is absolutely their right. Yeah. And then people will say, oh, but okay, what about economic refugees or economic migrants? To which I would say, well, many times those are actual refugees. It's just that climate issues are not ingrained in the way we talk about refugee resettlement. So if somebody loses their entire crop because of climate change, which is caused by us, then they don't have a recourse, they're called economic migrants. But in any case, why is it totally normal for us to talk about, oh, I want my daughter to go to school in Los Angeles because it's the best place for her to get an education. Or I want her to go to New York, or I want them to move here. But we don't think other people have the right to seek better lives. It's just shocking to me.
Well, and that in a sense, our primary vocation as humans is to survive, right? I mean, my husband and I do development work in Burundi, which is one of the least developed countries in Africa, and we have learned along the way that the number one vocation for any of us is to survive, and how deeply human it is, just as you said, to seek safety, and how we have weaponized that. It's again, I come back to the Holy Family. Like this is in the body of Jesus himself, that his family sought safety.
His family, because that's what all three of us hear. It's for the children. How many times have you heard? I bet you can't even count how many times you've heard it's for my children.
It is always for the children. And one thing I'd say, Kelley, also is, our primary requirement is to survive. But oftentimes, and certainly in my limited experience on the border in Mexico, the people who I met there were people who were fleeing for their lives now, having been threatened. Yeah. They were threatened because their primary aim was not to seek safety. Their primary aim was to seek justice and fairness in the places where they lived. These were the people who were courageous enough, and I think burdened with an overdeveloped sense of justice, to stand up against the corrupt and violent forces that were trying to twist everything into darkness. Many people go along with that. I imagine I would go along with that if I lived in that situation, because I would want to survive. But there are people who have the courage to stand up and say no, and to organize communities in their local towns to stand up and say no. And those are the people that are targeted and then flee. And so the people many times who are trying to enter our country, especially from Latin America, or I say, as far as I know, from Latin America, are the people who are the leaders of their communities, the
Mhm.
courage of lions, and the people who are seeking something more than surviving. They're seeking what is right. And so to hear in the press and from our administration that these people are crooks and thieves and liars, when they are in fact the exact opposite, well, it does my head in. And there are many people in this country who just haven't had the opportunity to learn otherwise, and so they go along with it, which gets back to what you were saying, Stephanie, about the essential role for all of us to find ways to get involved in the stories of those who are being demonized, even if it's only just to find out whether these things are true remotely or not. It's my absolute conviction that people will find out that it is absolutely not true, that these are the people that any wise thinking nation would want to have counted among
Mhm.
citizens.
You know, my husband is a dual citizen. As you know, when we got married, we became citizens of each other's countries so that we could move between, right? But he talked to me about coming from East Africa, that the minute he gets off the plane here, and he's not in danger. I mean, this is right. He is somebody who is privileged enough to travel on 2 passports. But he said, the minute I get off the plane in DC, it is like I instantly feel like back in Burundi, he's the guy you go to when you need help. You know, he's the guy, he is the guy who makes it happen in Burundi, the one
Right.
you go to to solve problems, to get a loan, to figure out how to feed your. He is the guy. But he says, I get off the plane in America and I am seen as a loser. People treat me like even sadly, my family, he said, it's like people treat me like I have nothing to contribute. I have no intelligence, that I'm nothing. And he says, what it does to your brain to get off a plane and be that low, perceived by others. But then when he gets on the plane and goes back home, he gets off the plane and everybody's like, help us solve this. And we've got this problem. And I think, Stephanie, when I was looking at your work and how you talked about these people, these were the pharmacists, these were the musicians, the artists, these were the historians. Like, we reduce them, as you said, to this one word, refugee, when they are these amazing people in their community. And I felt that so deeply when I read your work.
Well, thank you. I mean, I felt it so deeply in meeting them, these extraordinary, extraordinary human beings. I mean, Hannah, the first character who sews the entire story of her city into a dress, which I follow as a map back to the town she left behind, only to find it completely empty and devastated. But that was interesting to me too, because when I started this, I thought, okay, I'll ask people for a recipe. I'll ask people for a song or a photo. And then the first person I meet is Hannah, and she shows me her dress. And it has everything. It has her language, it has her home, it has her church, it has the wedding dances, everything in her life. And I was forced to confront the totality of what people lost. And I honestly, if I'm honest, I was like, I did not sign up for this. Like, I was supposed to write about a recipe. I was not supposed to write about a town that had 44,000 people one day and then the next day was empty. Like, and so being with them and listening to them made me realize that even myself, I was not prepared for the depth of their stories and the incredible witness they have to saving communities. When I heard about what you said about your husband, it struck me because, and Cristina, what you said about the reasons people leave. The people I wrote about, in large part, were targeted either because they were against the government or because they were being bombed or because they were from a community that was being targeted. And so, you know, they are an Aramaic speaking Christian or a musician from Al-Hasake who's Kurdish or a Yazidi. So they were being targeted for their identity, for their uniqueness. And holding on to their stories of their communities was a way of resisting and keeping their community alive. And then not only were they rejected when they sought asylum, they were told, you have to be like us. As like, so you were being erased, you fled because you were being erased, only to arrive at a place that says that you must be erased. And watching that is just, it's devastating.
Yes.
And it's not the end of the story, because so I posted on Facebook the other day a cute image of a dog wearing a sign, in Spanish saying more little kisses, fewer deportations, very cute. But in small, underneath that cuteness was a hashtag. And the hashtag was, we're here to stay, here to stay. And I posted it really because of that hashtag, here to stay, because everything you say, Stephanie, is happening here, of course, all the time. But so many people, because these are people of such courage and conviction and strength and ability, they are able to say with dignity, no, I'm going to continue and flourish. And that is what's going on, thanks to God, in many majority immigrant communities. I only know in Massachusetts, where people are coming together and claiming their blessedness, claiming their dignity, claiming their worth, celebrating what they have done in their local communities that benefits all people, and doing it with joy and a level of courage, again, that is just awe-inspiring, can only come from God. And after I spend time in these communities, I am restored to myself. It's like the medicine, because then I too believe, yes, it's possible. This time will also come to an end. And these people, as long as we listen to them and learn from them, can teach us how to persevere and finally triumph, while holding on to our dignity, our generosity, our humanity, and even our humor, right? And our whimsy, sewing your whole story into a dress. I mean, what magnificence is that? So if only we could do more sitting and listening and learning. I think we, being sort of secure American citizens, if we could sit and listen and learn more to people who are most imperiled at this time, we would all become more deeply human, and we would all dip into that deep well we're needing right now.
When I read your book, Cristina, you talked about how you approached your work, this project, not necessarily as a journalist, but as a priest, in part bearing witness to these stories. Yeah. And I think about what you just shared and how our viewers are wanting to know practically, how do I get my hands around this and become somebody who participates in bringing hope, participates in advocacy. And I think there is, sometimes we rush past how important bearing witness is and listening. And I love that you made that the center of your work, that this is really important. It really is an incarnational stance to say, I'm going to be present. And so I think for our viewers, I just would want to say, don't miss what Cristina just said, that is where I think we start, in seeing our neighbors as human, as Stephanie said, but listening to the stories and bearing witness. But what other things would you guys want to share, that people can participate as, to move in solidarity with their neighbors, to be tangible bearers of hope alongside these communities? What I think, absolutely, you guys have already started the conversation, but is there anything else we could be thinking, practicing?
I mean, the word hope is such an interesting word. It's a word I spend a lot of time with, but I'll never forget. I was in the north of Jordan. I was speaking to some people from Deraa in the south of Syria, which was, hit at the beginning of the war and was absolutely devastated. And somebody there who I met, she had family members who took the sea route to Europe. And she said, yeah, that's those people, they hope. And then she basically said, and then they drown. And it was the first time I heard hope used as a negative word. It was the first time people said it's dangerous to hope. If you stay here, you've got a fighting chance. But those people, exactly as you said, Cristina, those people who dare to hope, look at the things that happen to them.
Yeah.
That never left me, because then whenever I encountered people who are displaced, I was so moved by the almost miracle of the hope that brought them to take that journey. Migration is hopeful. It's such an audacious choice to continue to keep going. And so I think what we can do is to recognize that how the story ends depends on us. These are not stories about other people. These are stories about us. Are they welcomed and received? And do they become advocates and pillars of their communities and neighbors and friends? Or are they turned back? That's on us, And so the most hopeful thing we can do is to stop seeing ourselves as outsiders to other people's stories, but insiders in a story of our collective humanity that can and must be a hopeful story.
That's beautifully said.
So beautiful. And the only way to do that, I think, for most of us, unless we're politicians or judges or have a very specific big role, and everybody else must pray for those people every day. But for most of us, I think that the way forward is to pursue small, real things. And I'm kind of obsessed with this, small, real things, because I've seen time and time again, people get weighed down to the point of paralysis by the bigness of the situation. And that's no good. That just does lead to fear and paralysis. But small, real things make a small, real difference and multiply. And so what I tell people when they ask, which is all the time, is to find a local organization, ideally immigrant-led, but sometimes it's just a local organization that is serving immigrants. They've been doing it for a long time. They know how to do it. They know who is most in need. And offer yourself in small, real ways to that organization, especially people of faith. Too often, people in the church, we try to recreate things, like we built them from scratch as if we're the saviors coming in. No, there's already people doing this work in every town across this country. Find them and offer yourself to them. And the better organizations have ways to volunteer in person, which of course for me is the most transformative, but also online, and also financial donations. So important. And these things make a difference and birth hope, right? They shore that hope up. And again, I see it as medicine. The medicine for the poison of the moment is a small, real act of generosity, love, and self-offering. And again, that feels, I'm sure all the religious traditions have such a prescription. The only one I know well enough to say so is Christianity. And that for sure could be a Christian prescription written out over and over again. And in order to do that, Kelley,
yes,
I've been feeling the need of, is some offerings from theologians to help us in this moment. Because I can't sit and read. I have all the books, they're right over there. And I read them once a long time ago. But I don't have the wherewithal to plow through them and find what I need now. But I'm imagining you and your colleagues do. And so please make concise, right for us who are not theologians and not academics, and pull from the great theologians and the great people that you draw from and offer them to us. We need background, intellectual framework, the stuff of the faith that can help us going on and feed our minds as we're offering our hearts to others. I need that anyway, and I'm not finding it. So what would you think of such an
I mean, I don't know for other theologians, but I tend to be pretty verbose. So the remit to be brief and bring an offering is really hard for me. But no, the invitation to see theologians as being part of the work, I think is a good one for my soul to hear, to feel that there is a contribution to be made as we are helping to think through our holy texts and the language that we have been given and maybe need to kind of dust off and reimagine, in our current landscape. I think that when I was doing the work on this, looking at the Advent stories, I was actually really surprised, by the trauma that was in the birth stories around Jesus and his family. And it's like, wow, this is actually for today. Recognizing the trauma in the text back then actually made it sing in some sad ways, a bit of a dirge at times, but with what we see happening. And so I do think there is a place maybe for us to contribute language and theological imagination.
Yes.
I know, I grew up as a good evangelical girl, in my early days. And so I start off my mornings with poetry. And I have been using poetry from Palestinian brothers and sisters and immigrant men and women, and have found starting off my morning with their voices. And then I, call my representatives to do the little bit I can do as an advocate. And so my way of devotion has shifted a little bit in these days. It's not just meditating on scripture, but combining that morning meditation with the voices of my neighbors and some small step of action or advocacy every day. I can call my senators every morning, Monday to Friday, I do, just to make sure that I'm being a good neighbor, that I'm showing up and loving them in whatever small way I can today, even if that's making sure that the policies, that I'm needling my senators about is don't forget our immigrant neighbors, because we are standing with them. We are, it's like you said, small. It's small.
Small is good. Small is real.
There's a story that I came upon that I like to tell when I first started the book, which is I was in the north of Jordan and I met these refugees who had escaped Daraa in the south of Syria. And the first wave of refugees arrived. Syrians love to eat for breakfast something called makdous, which is this tiny eggplant stuffed with walnuts and hot peppers. And when they arrived, they discovered that a horrible thing, which is that in Jordan, they had just crossed the border, the eggplants were too big for makdous.
Yeah.
And so they called their family members who were still in the war and said, if God forbid you have to leave, then bring us our seeds. And they carried their seeds across the border. And when I met them, they were planting their local eggplants and making this makdous. And I realized, okay, we always say do something small. But here I thought, oh, this is real. Something so small. Seeds put in a pocket and carried. And then I found this all over the world, all over America. People are carrying their seeds from their communities, starting their gardens, So I'd say something else to do is, I think when we see migrants and refugees, we speak so often about what they lost. Speaking about what they saved is something very powerful. So giving them an opportunity to tell the stories of what they saved, which honors their resilience, their role as storytellers, their role as community leaders, I found that to be so powerful.
Such a beautiful way in. What did you bring? What completes you here? A way into their strengths and their giftedness. because I so agree, Stephanie. Too often we think, and that plays into the political narrative as well, that these are people who need things, therefore they are people who will be taking things from us.
Right.
When, as a matter of fact, these are people who have so many gifts to offer us,
Yes.
as we all do, and there's the incarnation of Jesus. For me, the implication of the incarnation of Jesus is that every single one of us is a bearer of the divine. Every single one of us. So even if you just need a hit of divinity, go meet someone you haven't met before and approach them as if there's something with a blessing to give you, and you will receive a blessing, and you will offer a blessing, where giving and receiving and that kind of mutuality as two children of God occurs. I'm talking about at a bus stop or at the local deli. Those are sacred encounters that change everything.
Yes.
And they are tiny. And no one can legislate against them. They are the stuff that life is made from, and they're what keeps me going.
I think, though, the idea of those seeds, I don't know. I think as a priest and a theologian, we have our work to do, don't we? That new metaphor of just not the mustard seed in Scripture, but the seeds that people are bringing and planting. I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about that for quite a while, Stephanie.
And maybe one more thing to share, which speaks to what both of you said about reimagining things. I think especially Cristina, what you are reminding us of, the profound importance of Kelley's work and of theologians in times of crisis, which for me, it's just food. It is food for the hungry. And at the heart of my book, there's a story of these two pharmacists in Aleppo who put everything they have into a pharmacy. Then the war comes and they lose the pharmacy, they lose their home, they lose everything. So they're internally displaced. And so this couple, they're both pharmacists, they move into a relative's home and they are completely depressed. And after a year passes or so, they sort of keep walking past the garage and then slowly start to think, what can we do? And they realize they can turn their pharmacy, their garage into a pharmacy. But they don't have any money. And so Gadir, this incredible person, she said they would have to look into the ruins of the city to find the materials to build something new. And she said that she discovered she had the eyes of creation. And so she looked into the ruined Cindy and she realized, oh, I can use that chair. I can still use it. This looks like it's broken, but it's not done yet. And so they create this pharmacy out of the ruins, and it really becomes a container for exactly what you said, Cristina, about they make a set of rules about welcoming people, offering coffee, listening, and then people start to come in the war from all over, but not to buy anything, but to have someone to talk to. And they call it the medicine of compassion. And so from this, I've told the story all over the world, to people in war, to people struggling, and it has taught me everything about how to survive times like this. And two things: how we see the world, the eyes with which we see the world, the belief that we have everything we need now, that we don't have to wait for a future moment in which but that we have everything we need to begin now. It's just how we see. That's so profound. And that it's all about, as you said, Cristina, encounter. That's the work. And it's refugees themselves who taught me that.
And me too. Refugees themselves who taught me that.
There really is. Oh, go ahead.
No, please, Kelley.
I was just going to say, it really is the work of being human, isn't it? To never lose sight of our humanity and the humanity of our neighbors, whether they are in movement or, right here staying put next to us, that we continue to see the humanity of one another, Jesus enfleshed in each one of our fellow neighbors. It's sometimes it's as basic as that, isn't it?
Yeah, that basic is the seed, to go back to the seeds. That is the seed of fullness of life.
Mhm.
Realizing the sacred nature of every single human being, and realizing also that while people who we traditionally think of as lacking have something to give, and that we who often put ourselves in the position of having something to give also lack many things. And
Yes.
we need each other, because my lack is different from your lack, and my strength is different from your strength. So only when we come together can we begin to become more whole. And if we could just approach each other from that place, everything would change. And many people are. And you don't have to do it alone. And just start,
Mhm.
and you will see the river will carry you on and towards. And I think that's, like Stephanie said, like Kelley said, that's how we're going to get through this time of difficulty in this country, by learning from folks who've gone through many difficult times in their countries and who have a lot of wisdom to share with us about how to maintain and cultivate humanity,
Yes.
ours and each other's, together.
Mm.
So beautiful. I wish we were together and that we could now go out and have one of those, what were they called? The little mini eggplant dishes?
Maktus. Yeah.
Macaroons together.
Yes, but please with some warm hummus and some fresh pita and
Oh,
And
and
some
coffee.
tea from Sammy. Sammy, you write about this
some tea
wonderful,
from Sammy.
this wonderful tea seller in Bethlehem. And I just wanted to add what Kelley shows so well. Sometimes, it turns out the person you are demonizing or on the margins is the main character of the story. You just don't know it yet.
Yes, I've learned that many times. Oh, I do wish we could finish off with a meal together and some hot tea. And I hope that this has been nourishment for those who have been part of this, that our viewers, as it has been for the three of us. It is my task to bring our time to a close. So I want to thank Stephanie and Cristina for their presence here today, but for their amazing work. I cannot encourage enough all of our viewers to pick up their books. I was humbled by the beauty of their writing, the poignancy. I just, please, you will be able to bear witness and enter into this work when you read each of their books, please.
All
But
three of the books, Kelley.
Right back
Sorry.
there.
thank you. But thank you for joining us today. Let me just double check. Again, you can catch up on the series and the previous two conversations again on YouTube and Facebook. We are open to any of your feedback, so please feel free to give Broadleaf any feedback that they may need. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.